All right, Kathleen, thank you so much for joining the Life on Purpose podcast today. I'm so grateful that you're here to talk about this important topic of aging, something that we seem to be running from these days, especially women.
Oh, we do. Thank you for having me. Yes, it's a topic I'm pretty passionate about. It was over 10 years ago when I was about to turn 60 that all of this really began to sink in, Brandy. And it's because this culture just doesn't accept the idea that people are supposed to get older. Our culture sort of sees it as sort of a sad ride on the downslope, that nothing really good is going to happen after you turn 50. And I'm sort of on a mission to change that, to sort of turn that thinking upside down. The challenge is not trying to stay young. The challenge is really reclaiming our right to grow old, which is a natural thing that every human being does.
Right. And accepting it. And you, I mean, you are so passionate about this topic. You wrote a book, right?
I did.
Yeah, right. So reclaim your right to grow old. Right. Which we'll dive into that too. But you also have kind of an interesting backstory before we get into all this fun aging stuff. So people may or may not recognize your voice. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, they won't recognize it from my voice today. It's like anything else. As I've gotten older, my voice has become a little creakier. But yes, at one point, believe it or not, I was the most heard voice in America. And the New York Times did a front page story on it.
Oh, right. That's so funny.
Yeah, it was back. And I don't know if this is before your time, it's certainly not before mine, when people called directory assistants to find out a telephone number. And you would dial 411 and you would get a recording. Well, I auditioned for the job of this voice I was working as an advertising copywriter, and it was this agency that the people who developed the technology were a client of the agency. So they auditioned everybody and they picked me because I didn't have an accent and I could articulate various syllables that they thought that was important going into the technology that they had at that time. So it turned out all these Bell companies bought this product and I was the voice. So all of a sudden, I'm like 80-90% of the country. When you call directory assistance,
It was
you would get, it would be me. And this is so funny, Brandy, because I would call it. I mean, everybody did back then.
Sure.
I would call it and I would hear my own voice. And as I hung up, I'd say, thanks, Kath. So it was fun. It was sort of an odd thing to do, but it is sort of my claim to fame.
And it kind of marks this time in history a little bit, especially since we're talking about aging. You were kind of solidified, you and your voice, in that period of time, because nobody calls 411 anymore. I mean,
no, they don't.
So
they really don't.
You are solidified in a certain time in history. You're kind of nostalgic a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the things about being older that's so nice, is that we can impart this part of our past to newer generations. And, they always say, well, grandpa's always talking about what happened in the past, but these things are important. What happened before people were born? Oh, this is what it was like to be alive in 1960 or 1940 or however old your grandparents might be. And this is important information for younger generations to know. So I carry all these memories and they're fun. It's fun to be able to talk about them.
Well, and it kind of informs your ideologies too. If you know, like, where your parents and your grandparents came from and kind of the time that they lived in, it informs the ideologies that they're passing on to you. And I feel like there's been something lost in the last few decades of not passing down wisdom anymore. We don't really revere wisdom from our parents or our grandparents or our great grandparents anymore. And it's a sad thing for me to think about a little bit, because I had that reverence for my grandparents past, my parents past, because it helped me to understand where I came from, and those things. And I feel like we maybe are kind of getting away from that a little bit.
Yeah, I think we are in our very youth-oriented culture.
Mm-hmm.
We're so concerned about what's hip, what's now, what the zeitgeist is all about, which is actually sort of being promoted by younger folks. And don't get me wrong, I think younger folks are fantastic. I love their energy. I love their creativity. I like their ability to just think about all the possibilities for humankind. I mean, we need young people, but we also need old people,
Right.
because for the very reason you're explaining right now. There are cultures still, although some of this is waning even in some of what I call the more enduring cultures, but there are cultures now, even today, where younger people still listen to their elders' wisdom. And I like to think of it like this. I mean, would you go to a surgeon who had a baseball cap on backwards and was calling everybody dude who hadn't been to medical school, but he was hip? Or would you listen to an older person, an older woman who'd had 30 years of experience in surgery, who had her scrubs on, who knew what she was doing? Who would you go to? Well, of course, you would go to the experienced surgeon. And we're losing something when we don't, from time to time, check in with our elders, talk to our parents about, and I know a lot of people do ask for their parents' advice, but listen to it. Yeah, your parents might be a little different than you. They might seem too conservative for you on some level. Actually, as I've grown older, I've become more progressive, more open to ideas, but everybody's different.
Mm-hmm.
But listening to the wisdom of someone who was here before you were and really knows more about life than you is important. And we have lost it. And I'd like to see a return to a little more respect for elders.
And
really
and I agree with that completely. And it has to make me wonder, or any of us wonder a little bit, if a part of what's happening is the speed at which our culture is changing, because it's so rapid. It is so rapid. And a lot of the times, and I've spoken to this about this to even friends of mine, there are things that I'm dealing with my children and with my family that I can't get advice from my mom from, because she hasn't dealt with technology with her children the way I have. And so there's kind of this rapid change. And it's not necessarily doesn't have anything to do with lack of respect, but we kind of have this like breakdown of connection in our cultures, in our my parents' culture and her parents' culture, or their parents' culture, was so much different. And there's kind of this disconnect. But what you're speaking to is getting the wisdom that is there and tapping into it so that you can kind of work out whatever it is, whatever issue you're dealing with in present time.
Yes. And I think what older people also offer is obviously perspective.
Sure.
And that ability to look maybe at the big picture, to have been through so many experiences that, we can say, well, that problem's going to solve itself. Or why don't you step back and think about this issue for a few days before you jump in? And I know that's anathema to a lot that goes on. You were just referring to it in our culture. You feel like you have to move at lightning speed.
Right.
I think one of the things that older people can offer us today is to reinforce the idea that, well, just because the culture is moving that way, you still have the ability to sit back, Brandy, you and anyone your age or people younger than you, to sit back and go, wait a second. I don't know if I totally like what's going on here. I know what my values are. I'm just going to sit back and not act on this for a day or so, or a week, or I'm going to talk to people. And another thing, like I just said, a lot of times problems solve themselves. And over the years, I can see it over and over again. I used to stress out over everything. I used to say, oh my gosh, if this doesn't happen immediately, what will I do? But I have seen through the years that a lot of times the things I worried most about never happened. So this is wisdom I can impart to you. I can impart to other younger people to just kind of make them feel a little better
And it's
about
wisdom that's
where they are.
timeless. Yeah, it's timeless wisdom.
Yeah.
It's things that never change. And it's funny that you say that, because me personally, me as a person, I I really like wish for the time, the simpler times, that if we could go backwards and things weren't so complicated and things were way more simple, um I would be in heaven, I think. So, I probably lean more towards your advice of kind of sitting back and seeing how things play out, because I am more of a simple, easygoing kind of chill person that way. Um, but it's nice for me to tap into my family members because they remind me of that simpler time. Um, and I'm actually really grateful for the people in my life who don't necessarily talk down on my generation, but help us to understand how we got here. That makes
Yeah, it's the same way people talk about baby boomers and they cast aspersions on boomers like, okay, boomer. But it's kind of understanding. I mean, I can see how your generation and younger generations are, having to, well, struggle maybe is too strong a word, but maybe not. I mean, deal with, like you said, the pace of life that's moving so quickly. And what I can tell you about baby boomers is our lives weren't all a bed of roses either. We were really the first generation to face the annihilation of the planet by nuclear weapons. And I remember the Cuban Missile Crisis very well. I was in ninth grade. I mean, a lot of these things informed our generation. And it's one of the reasons why we protested so much. We wanted to change things. And actually, we changed a lot of things.
Yeah.
So, I have to kind of stand up for boomers. I'm on the leading edge of the boomer generation, and I know what we went through. Even though my childhood was pretty idyllic, like you talked about, Brandy, my parents just sent me out the door in the morning in the summer. I could ride my bike. Nobody worried about where I went.
Yeah.
As long as I came home for lunch, and then as long as I came home for dinner, everything was fine. Well, that was pretty nice.
Yeah.
But we also had a lot of other turbulence going on. We had people assassinated when I was in high school and in college, and a lot of turmoil. So I think we have to, it's like I point out in my book, every life stage has importance.
Right.
We have to understand what informs each life stage. So, I have to understand where folks like you are coming from, and I like to think I do. And, conversely, I hope that younger people can understand where we've been and where we're going and what we would like to offer back to the culture. And I think there's a lot we can offer back.
Sure. And I completely agree with with that sentiment too, because learning from each other can only help each generation understand the other and respect a little bit. And, kind of back to your point of where where have we lost this respect for our seniors, for our elders, for people who are older than us, who have been in different generations than us, who have lived different challenges than us? Where have we lost that?
Well, I think, it does go back to this emphasis on youth. And we judge everything by how young you are. Look young,
Mhm.
feel young, be young. But amazingly, the whole thing sort of began in our Western culture, different from Native American cultures or African cultures or Eastern cultures. What we did here, and this is kind of startling, is it kind of began with graveyards. And that goes back a little ways.
Mhm.
But when we started burying people in graveyards instead of our backyards, what we were saying is we want to remove ourselves from death, from getting older and the things that can go wrong when you get older. And there was this sort of, and part of it's this Victorian sensibility too, which was a Calvinist sensibility that said, basically, if you have a good old age, if you're young and vibrant in your old age, well, it must be because God shines upon you and you've lived a good life.
Mhm.
And if you're struggling in old age, forget mental health issues, forget accidents, forget genetics. I mean, it was that kind of feeling. Well, then, you haven't been a very good person. So people kind of wanted to remove themselves from others who were not aging well,
Mhm.
certainly to remove themselves from people who had died and kind of sweep that stuff under the rug.
So kind of
So
ignore it.
kind of ignore it. And that was
Yeah.
sort of the beginning of, if you're young and vibrant, that's great. If you're not, that's not so good. And then of course you get, a society that's very market driven and kind of picks up on this and then is selling us everything from wrinkle injections to tummy flattening underwear to teeth whitening to all. And the whole point of it is you gotta stay young. But this really flies in the face, and I know you're a believer in this, of sort of a holistic view of your life.
Mhm.
You can't stay young. You can stay active. You can
Right.
feel as good as you can feel at a certain age, but you cannot turn the clock backwards. And really, why would we want to do that? If you're going to live a whole life
Right.
from beginning to end, you need to experience every single stage to its fullest. And the end stages of our lives are some of the most fulfilling stages that we encounter as human beings, because
Mhm.
now, and I can see it myself, as I get closer to the end, I can begin to put the pieces of my life together. I can begin to see my place in the world. Who am I really? What's life
Right.
about? These are big questions, and they're very hard to be answered by people who have not had the life experience of an older person.
'Cause you don't have the whole picture yet.
You don't have the whole picture.
Right.
That is the point. I mean, I'm not saying there aren't philosophers who don't think about this sort of thing. They do, and they come up with extraordinary philosophies, which have guided many of us through our lives.
Yeah.
But in order to really see it personally, you have to have lived
Right.
these years. And that's why being old is so valuable. To go back and be young again would be to deny the richness of old age. And
Right.
I don't want to miss a moment of it. I don't.
Right, and there was a couple points here I wanna touch on a little bit, and that's the marketing aspect. And it also leads me to the point of, these products, these anti-aging products, these philosophies that are being kind of shoved in our faces 24/7 are primarily to women. So, and I'm not sure if this is something that you've touched on at all, but why is it more okay societally or more acceptable for men to age than women? Because I feel like there's not kind of this looking down upon a man who's aging as much as there is a woman who's aging. It seems like we need to remain young and vibrant and that really plays on a woman's psyche. I don't my my husband doesn't get up in the morning and worry about his wrinkles or his gray hair. Whereas, I'm 38 years old, and the closer I get to 40, the more I notice my skin is changing and my hair texture is changing, and things are sagging where they didn't used to before. Whereas he could care less. But me, I wonder, okay, did people notice this? Because we've got no
Well,
intense pressure.
first of all, you look fabulous. So you've got a long way to go to be worried about it. But see, even at your age, you're thinking about it.
Oh, completely.
And I do think that our culture and our country is sexist. I mean, I think we expect women to always be youthful and beautiful and attractive and sexy.
Quiet.
And quiet, which I've never been. So I've never fit into that little mold.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
and I think that also plays into ageism too, sexism and ageism combined together. And actually, it's not just younger people who have sort of pushed this idea that youth is better and women should be gorgeous throughout their lives. Older people do this too. We are sort of our own worst enemies when it comes to this. I know a number of women who won't tell their age. And, when a woman doesn't, I mean, I'm happy to say, I'm proud to say that in a couple of weeks, I'll be 73. I'm proud to say that I have survived these years and, with things pretty much intact, and I feel great about it. But when women particularly, and men too sometimes, are afraid to admit how old they are disparaging their own old age. They're saying I'm not good enough. I don't deserve your attention. If you actually think I'm 80, for instance, I got to pretend like I'm 65 and then maybe I'll be relevant. Well, we're relevant just the way we are. And when we buy into that myth of irrelevancy, because we're older, we are fomenting, all of these negative stereotypes that go with it. Yeah.
So you're not wearing it, not you particularly, but older people aren't wearing that age as a badge of honor. So by hiding it, you're saying, I'm ashamed of living this long, or I'm ashamed of, which seems crazy because that seems like a badge of honor that you've lived a long, fulfilling life, hopefully fulfilling, but at least a long life, that you would want to kind of be proud of that.
You would think so, but in this culture, I mean, there's a lot of work to do to kind of shift this paradigm. There's an interesting story. I don't know if you probably do, who Ram Dass is. He was a Harvard professor who sort of went off to search for his own spirituality and, sort of garnered a following of people, kind of a new age guy, pretty smart.
Yeah.
And he went to India to study, and then he came back to the US for about 20 years. So he decided he was going to go back to India because he hadn't been to this little village where he had spent so much time. So he took this long trip, the plane, the train, the bus. He finally gets to this little village, he hadn't been to India in 20 years, and he sees his friend from a distance, and his friend comes running up and hugs him and says, "Oh, Ram Dass, you're old." And Ram Dass was kind of taken aback. He looked at him and he said, well, of course, he'd been in the US for about 20 years in our culture. And he said, well, I think I look pretty good. I take care of myself. What do you mean I'm old? He said, oh, Ram Dass, no, what I mean is you're old. You're an elder now. We will listen to you. We will respect you. You're at the top of our society now. You're the one we come to for advice. Being old is a great honorific. It's a badge of honor in our culture. And what a difference. If somebody says to you, Brandy, you look a little old today. I mean, that, you recoil. It's
like a gut punch.
Yeah, because old is such a pejorative and in this culture, but it isn't everywhere. And, we can borrow a little from these other cultures and learn something about the fact that being old is not a bad thing.
Well, it's so funny when you were telling that story, and just as you were getting to the part where he said, "Oh, you're old," I just remember, "Oh, who's that?" Like, that's so rude.
Well, would really think so? Yes.
Yeah. Because in our culture, if somebody says that to you, you're like, "Oh, that's not nice."
No, why would you say that? My heavens, where did you come from? Right. Yes, exactly right.
Meaning it as a compliment. I love that. I love that.
Yeah, it's a great story. And, I think that it just points up the great difference between a culture that respects all of the stages of life and a culture that simply seems to think that, well, life kind of ends at 50 and you got to spend the rest of it pedaling as fast as you can to keep the aura of youth going. And I'm here to say you don't.
Yeah. Just a personal story. I was sitting here thinking about this as you were speaking. My husband lost his father almost 4 years ago. It'll be 4 years ago in July. He actually passed away just hours before we gave birth to our third child.
Oh, dear.
And I remember my husband just feeling kind of resentful of losing that time because his father was newly retired, and he just felt like, wow, he spent his entire life working to retire to then be gone. And he has looked at his life since then, and it is a goal of his to not let that happen to him. Kind of appreciate this in between stage that sometimes, we at my age, we're just like trying to get through, we're just trying to get through to retirement. And it sounds like the older years are these beautiful, introspective kind of, like you said, bigger picture years. But there's also that fear of death. I mean, how can we look at getting older and not fear the end? Or how can we also appreciate it?
Yeah, I think it's really important. And what you were saying as you were speaking there too, I was thinking about one of the things that older people, I think, can help younger people do is to help them infuse more of the joy of elderhood into their lives now.
Mm-hmm.
Part of being an older person is self-reflection. And there are studies that show that this is almost an innate process that older people go through to kind of come to terms with who they are before they aren't, if you will. So one of the things your husband and you can do, and other young people your age, is to try to be more reflective, try to stay more in the moment. It's hard. It's hard when you've got children and careers. I know it's hard because I remember it myself from my own history, but I wish that I had spent a little more time, me time, Me time is important because as you
Yeah.
get older, that me time becomes exaggerated and you actually can indulge yourself in doing that. And that is one of the reasons why studies show that older people are more reflective. They tend to become more spiritual, whether they are religious or not. But
Mhm.
even if they aren't, they don't follow any religion, they still become more interested in spirituality. And all of it really seems to say that it's your time of life to kind of prepare for this next phase, which is death, dying and death. And if you believe that there's a life beyond, then, you know, as they do in the Hindu religion, there are 4 stages of life. Basically, there's childhood, where you take everything in, what they call a householder, where you take care of everyone, which is what you're doing
Yes.
right now.
Yeah,
You're
correct.
right in the middle of that.
Mhm.
And then there are actually 2 stages there's elder and ascetic, which doesn't sound good, but actually it's more about really preparing yourself for reincarnation, which is what Hindus believe in.
Mhm.
But they actually devote 2 stages of the 4-stage life cycle to your later years. That's how important they think they are, because they believe preparing yourself for death is important. Now, do you have to think about it all the time? No, of course not. But you do have to come to terms with it on some level. And we don't talk about death enough in this culture. And
No.
we kind of uh, put people away quickly. We get them in the ground, we cremate them. We don't want to spend any time thinking about them. I mean, we love them certainly, but we
Sure.
don't want to think about that process. And
Because it
in order,
reminds us of
yeah,
our own mortality if we do.
yes, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really fascinating because, you know, and we were talking about this before we started recording, is that, you know, I've done a past episode talking about this very topic, that somehow we've gotten away from talking about the very idea that our life will end. There's no getting out of this alive. There's just not. And we try to ignore that instead of embracing and accepting that. And I think that that makes it really difficult, especially for those left behind, to not have had those conversations along the way. You know, back to my husband's father, that was very sudden, and it's not something that any of us had spoken about with him. I know, you know, it wasn't something they talked about. um so we don't really have this appreciation of that process, which made it kind of this massive gut punch on top of the fact that you've lost somebody that you love, but that along the way you didn't prepare. How important is that understanding of life from the beginning to the end, to really appreciating those later years?
Yeah, you know, we don't have a very contemplative society, do we?
No.
You know, you think about Twitter or Facebook or whatever, you know, the first thing that comes to mind is the thing you put down, then you say, why did I say that? I should have thought about it a little bit.
Right.
And I think that that sort of permeates our thinking about everything,
Yeah.
including death, you know, and then all of a sudden we're faced with it. Well, I haven't thought about this and I haven't dealt with it. I think that, you know, part of certainly of getting older is to think about it, but I think we can all come to terms with it in a way if we take it out of hiding
Mhm.
and bring it into the open and see it as the important thing that it is. I mean, I remember going to my grandfather's funeral. It was the first time I was ever on a plane. It was 1956. And they had stewardesses in these cute little outfits with gloves and hats. It was so
Back when
cute.
flying was glamorous instead
Oh,
of
it was
just a
fabulous.
headache.
And you got like a 3 or 4 course meal and everything. Oh,
Yeah.
it was so wonderful. But my parents took me, even though I was only 8 years old, and because they wanted me to see what this process was about.
Yeah.
And I am very grateful that they did, because my grandfather was Irish and they had a big Irish wake.
Oh.
And that's another thing we've kind of lost, are these rites of passage, these ceremonies that remind us that, you know, for instance, in the Jewish faith, as sitting Shiva, it's so important for a week or more to stay with people who have lost a loved one, to grieve with them and allow them to grieve. There are just too many situations where we don't have that opportunity. So I think it is good to talk to older people about, what kind of a death do you want?
Yeah.
I think that's a really important question. Now, we don't always have control. I mean, we can have a heart attack, we can be in an accident, we don't have a choice.
Something sudden, sure.
Something sudden, but if we live long enough, maybe the death process will be a little longer. Well, what do you want? Who do you want to be with you?
Yeah.
If maybe you don't even believe in praying, but would it make you feel better if people prayed for you after you departed? If that makes you feel better, go for it. Talk to people about not just the financial aspects of leaving this realm, but the psychological and emotional aspects. You know, here's what I want you to do for me. I want you to visit my grave. I want you to pray for me. I want that, believe it or not, does alleviate some of the fear, because you feel, I think we're all afraid that, well, people will forget me and I'll be all alone. Well, there are ways to circumvent that by talking about it. And we don't, you're right, we just don't talk about it, and we need to.
Right. Nobody wants to feel irrelevant in life or in death. And yeah, or being alone at the end. And I think that's something that we've talked about on this show before, is we've kind of gotten away from these I don't know if rituals is the right word, but giving our elders who are passing on the respect of not being alone when they do. And it was no more apparent, and I don't want to be controversial in saying this, but it was no more apparent than during the lockdowns, with people dying alone in nursing homes or even hospitals, and I think that was probably one of the more sad things to think about, you know, because my husband also has a 97, 98-year-old grandmother. I can't remember, one of those 97 or 98, who was locked down in a nursing home this whole
Oh,
time. And we
heavens.
remember
Yeah.
thinking, you know, the last time we saw her could have been the last time we saw her, because nobody was allowed to hold her hand or be with her. And I think, again, not to be controversial, but I think that those rituals are important too, to be able to be with our elders as they pass on, and have these rituals, like you said, of whatever your religious beliefs may be, or whatever the rituals within those beliefs are still important. And I think we're getting away from those as well, because that is a sign of respect of that person's life. And right, what you said earlier is also having that conversation of how they want their death to be, and honoring that. I'm very clear. My mother and I have talked about this. I'm very clear about what her wishes are. She's not very old. She had me very young. So, you know, I feel like, God willing, I have a lot of years left with her.
I'm sure you do.
Sure, but we have those conversations. I'm very clear on that. I hope that, you know, we can have these open conversations with my children. You know, they've experienced the loss of a grandparent, um, which was very hard. But like you said, that is a very important part of life, and an important stage for the youth to accept and understand.
Yeah, it really is. I love the word you use there, important, because when my mother-in-law was 94 and she was in hospice, and she was only there a week. But I went every day, and it was like tearing myself away to leave her, because I had the same feelings you have, Brandy, about I didn't want her to be alone. And as I held her hand, and she was unresponsive, but very comfortable, and as they are in hospice, it's such a beautiful place to spend your last days. It really is.
Yeah.
I felt there was something very important going on. I felt, this is me, everybody has a different view, but I felt that she was transitioning. And I felt it was important to be there to say it's okay. In fact, one of the nurses told me, have you told her it's okay to go?
Yeah.
Because she may be holding on thinking, oh, I mean, maybe not consciously, but we don't know what goes on.
Energetically, right. I mean, energetically kind of just,
yes,
it
her
doesn't feel
energy. I
natural
mean,
to let go, but if
right.
that permission is given and you know that, okay, because we, especially women, mothers, have this need to protect, kind of care
Mhm.
for. And if we feel like the people left behind aren't okay or won't be okay, yeah, I can see that being something to hold on for even longer. But that's a really beautiful message.
Yeah, I really felt, and that's why I think death is important. It is important
Yeah.
for us to be there. It is also important for us to say it's okay to go.
Yeah.
And whatever else this person in our lives has asked for, oh, I want to have, I want you to play the guitar while I'm in hospice. Fine. If that's what you want and they allow it there, that's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Because death is important. It is the end of a life that we want, like you said, to have respect for, to give it importance. And even after someone dies, I mean, there is, again, in the Jewish faith, there is a tradition called Havra Kanisha, I believe. I hope I pronounced it right. It's in my book. I have to look it up. Havra Kanisha, and it's a holy society that stays with the body after it passes.
Yeah.
They ceremonially bathe the body and stay with it until the body can be buried. And to me, this is so comforting, because one of the things we worry about is we're going to be alone.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to die and I'm going to be in some funeral home somewhere with a bunch of other bodies.
Alone. Yeah.
Alone.
Right.
So when this group stays with this body, it's such a beautiful ritual. And it must be comforting to the people who are loved ones of the departed, but also to the departed, because the departed knew that this group was going to be there.
Right.
And who knows what value there is in knowing that you're not going to be alone. So I think it's lovely. And I wish I could have something like that.
Sure. I mean, you're right. I feel like it is very important, especially for the people left behind, because it's their process too. It's their process of having this time period, this grieving period, this transition period, also for them to be introspective, to honor, to appreciate the whole picture of that person's life, and be able to really grasp that. And you're right. I mean, you mentioned earlier on that it's very quick when someone passes, death to ground or cremation or what have you. There's not really this period where we honor them anymore. We don't have these rituals like we used to. And I love the idea of having that, because those of us who are getting closer to death may make the end a little less scary.
Yeah, I think anything any of us can do to make it less scary, we should do now while we're
Sure.
cognizant, while we're very much alive. I
Yeah.
think thinking about it, and it doesn't have to be a burden like, oh God, now I've got to think about death. No,
Yeah.
it's like it's your choice. What do
Right.
you want? What do you want?
Yeah.
Well, here's what I want. I want people to pray for me. I want people to stay with me. I want to hear music. Well, then tell them, write it down,
Yeah.
whatever it takes, because that will give you some comfort about your own death. Because as you pointed out in the beginning, it is inevitable. No one sails out of here without going through that process. You got to go through that door.
Right.
And what can we do to make that better? There is nothing wrong with asking that question. And
Yeah.
there is nothing wrong with telling our loved ones what we want.
Absolutely. Gosh. And that's such a deep topic. And I appreciate that part of the interview and you kind of diving deep with me on those. So sometimes we go off on these more introspective topics. But I want to kind of go backwards to the more physical parts of aging. And why, so in your book, you talk about the idea of stop trying to age gracefully because we're always trying to outrun wrinkles, saggy skin, pigmentation, gray hairs, whatever it may be, whatever your vice against aging is, we're always trying to run from it. Why to you is it important that we just not worry so much?
Well, I guess I don't like the term aging gracefully. I have had little, not arguments, discussions with people about.
Fiery discussion.
Yes. And I have some much older friends who would argue that they want to age gracefully. My problem with it is when you don't ask a little kid to be a little kid gracefully.
Yeah.
You tell a little kid, just go out, have fun, be yourself, enjoy yourself. So when people say, I'm trying to age gracefully, it's as if they are doing it for someone else. Because being old is a bad thing, ergo, I have to be graceful about it. And my feeling is it is a good thing. You can be graceful or not. And you can be eccentric, you can have fun, you can get a tattoo, you can dye your hair purple, you can speak out about your politics if you want. You can argue with people about that if you want. You can.
That sounds like my worst nightmare.
Yeah,
I've
I'm
got a lot of
still.
strong opinions that I keep to myself. So maybe when I'm your age, I'll be able to do that.
I do it a little more, but I also try not to be rude,
Oh,
as we
sure.
talked about being rude. But
Sure.
yeah, I mean, I speak up a lot more now than I did when I was your age, for sure.
Sure.
But to
There's that
me,
wisdom again, and I can't wait.
yes, exactly right.
Yeah.
Because the point is, part of getting older is to discover who you really are.
Yeah.
Who am I really? Because I've played so many roles. I've had to conform so often in various careers. And I know that, you would feel the same way about that.
Yeah.
And so, but now I don't have to do that. And darn it, I'm not going to do it. So, yeah, should I be graceful? I don't know. I mean, in certain circumstances, I can be graceful so that I'm not rude or I don't
Yeah.
hurt people's feelings. But on the other hand, there's nothing wrong with being old, and I don't have to do it gracefully. I can do it any darn way I want to do it. And that's what I'm going to do. So
That's
that's my advice to people who are my age and older or even younger.
I
Go
love
ahead
that
and
idea because yeah, like you said, I had never really thought of that as being, when somebody says age gracefully, that it's kind of like them saying, well, your wrinkles offend me.
yes.
Or
Yeah.
why
Why are you just in the background being graceful? Why are
why
you
does
out
my
there showing everybody that you're old? Well, you know why? Because I am old and I'm happy about it. And if you don't like it, well,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. but I have fewer years left than you. I don't mean you, Brandy,
Well,
but
sure,
well, I
sure.
do actually. But the point is, so because I have fewer years, I want to make the most of
Why am
them.
I going to waste them? Sure. And there
Exactly.
again is that wisdom that I can take, or somebody my age can take from you and say, why do we care so much? Why do we
Yeah.
care so much? If
Yeah.
you're being, and that's kind of something that I tell my kids a lot. You're allowed to have an opinion as long as you're not disrespectful or rude about it. Your opinion is your opinion. How you feel about something is how you feel about something. Don't apologize. We can talk, we can have a conversation, but the whole rude thing. So, and it's funny that I give that advice because I was terrible at taking it when I was their age. I'm still, I'm still pretty terrible at taking my own advice, but
Sometimes when I'm leafing through my book, looking something up, like how did I pronounce that or whatever, I actually I have to tell you this. I sometimes say, Kath, you need to take your own advice more often because, it is hard. Right? And what you're telling your children is beautiful. And believe me, being the mother of a guy who is now middle-aged, I can tell you that you think they don't pay attention, but they do, and they remember, and they do exhibit these characteristics you're hoping they're going to have, which
I
is
hope
very
so.
rewarding. Yes, they will. And it's very rewarding. You'll
We're
love it.
getting ready to go through like I said, my son's getting ready to be 13. So we're kind of starting like the teen years. And then I've got a daughter who's in her preteen years. And then we have a preschooler, so we've got all the phases going on. But I have heard that those phases with your adult children are some of the most rewarding. And I think that's another reason why some of us hold on to our youth is because we don't want to let go of our babies, because we see them growing, which makes us feel older and kind of having to let go of these little babies that then become humans. But again, I've heard those are some really, really rewarding years.
Yeah, they really are, because you can talk adult to adult
Yeah.
with your children, and what you discover is, yeah, maybe I could have done a better job here or there, but overall I did a better job than I thought I did. I was a very young parent, and I mean, oh, I didn't know what I was doing, but I did all right. And my son says, "Oh, mom, you were a great mom," which is,
Oh,
isn't that nice? And I always love hearing that. And I think back to the things I didn't do well, and I think, how could he think that?
right.
But kids do kind of, it's like anybody else. They get a sense of who you are as a person. And yeah, you make mistakes, but generally they know who you are. They love that about you, and they respect that about you. And yes, you will absolutely enjoy every moment of your kids when they're adults. You really
Well, I
will.
certainly know my relationship with my mom. And my dad passed away when I was very young, but my relationship with my mom has changed to be this friendship, to where I call her all the time for advice. And sometimes she'll be like, I don't know. We didn't have to deal with that, but I'll help you through it, kind of situation, which I'm also very grateful for. Um, so yeah, again, I love how our relationship through her getting older. And it's strange because I sit here and I think about aging, and we watch our parents do it, but it still doesn't, for me personally, and I can't speak to anybody else, it doesn't change anything for me. I don't look at her any differently than I did when I was a teenager or a kid. I mean, she's still my mom. She still looks the same to me. I mean, she'll make comments every once in a while about her wrinkles or her saggy skin, but I don't see it, if that makes sense.
Yes. And isn't that lovely? I think,
Yeah.
it's interesting when we love someone, or certainly when we care about someone, in a way, they become more attractive to us. And that's another thing about getting older that I think is important. We worry, older people say, well, I don't look like I used to. But like you're saying, my son still sees me the way I was when I was your age.
Sure.
And I felt that way about my parents. And then my older friends, the more I get to know them, the more I care about them, the more beautiful they become.
Right.
And you do have an acceptance. This is something young people need to also remember. You say, oh God, how am I going to deal with looking old or gaining weight or whatever? There's something that you have there's an acceptance that you have. It's like, it's okay.
Right.
It's okay. So if you're worried about that, don't, because as you age, although I'm sure you'll age beautifully,
Not
but as you,
gracefully.
but as you age, you will actually be very accepting of it, which is a wonderful gift that comes, another great gift that comes along.
You know
with
what? And,
growing
and I
old.
find this really interesting. When I think about aging, and like I said, as I get closer to 40, I notice different things. It's not something I obsess about. I've never been overly obsessed with my body or my appearance or anything like that. But it's you aging um in relation to like your spouse. How's my spouse going to feel about me as I get older? Those are the things that I think that we especially worry about. And luckily, I have a spouse who's very complimentary towards me and never makes me feel old or ugly or anything. He's always super very complimentary, and so I think that helps. Um, but I think that's another kind of cultural thing too. Men want young. Men want younger women. And so how is a person supposed to be accepting of aging if culturally aging means the breakdown of a relationship potentially?
Yeah, that is hard. I think, but I will say that I think that mature men,
Mm.
not all men, but men who are really mature and know themselves
Right.
and are secure within themselves, want mature women who know themselves and are
Right.
secure within themselves. And certainly the whole youth thing, well, that's why the culture needs to look at old age differently. And I mean, it's one of the reasons that I am passionate about this subject, because I don't, I don't want people, particularly women, to continue to suffer with this idea that, oh, I'm never going to be good enough. I'm going to be irrelevant. I'm becoming invisible. That's a
Yeah.
word I hear so many older women use, the same word, invisible.
That's
I'm
interesting.
invisible. Men used to look at me, now they don't. I go into a store to buy something at the cosmetics counter, and the woman behind the counter looks right through me.
Mm.
And I've lost some importance. Well, a lot of that is cultural.
Yeah.
We need to see more older role models out there. And
Oh,
I'm not just
completely.
talking about glamorous looking older women. I'm talking about all older men and women. And we
Yeah.
need to see the way they look and the way they act, and everything about them as acceptable, the very least acceptable. And beyond that, to say they should be respected for all they have contributed to our
For the
culture.
life that they've lived and
Yes.
the service they've contributed to being on this planet for as long as they have. I completely agree with that. And it's funny, and I'm sitting here thinking how much freer you would feel if you didn't have to worry about feeling guilty about aging, and how much money you would save if you didn't buy all those stupid products trying not to age, or at least hiding your age.
Oh, it's so true, isn't it? It is very freeing. I mean, I'm a product of the culture too. And I was
Yeah,
a television broadcaster where appearance was incredibly important.
yeah. Hey, this is
So,
why I podcast, so nobody can pick apart my appearance.
well, I think they'd have a hard time doing that anyway, because you look terrific.
Oh, you're
But
sweet.
but yeah, we're all products of this
Yeah.
culture. But I think that in order to appreciate, like you said, what it is to be old, and to let go of the constraints, and they are constraints that the culture
Yeah.
puts on us to continually try to be young. Yes, we would save money.
Oh,
And yes, we would feel freer. I mean, I used to feel when I went out for a walk, I had to have, when I was younger, particularly when I was on television, oh, I had to have makeup on. What if I see someone at the
mhm.
grocery store? Well, now it's like, I don't care.
What if
If
you
I
see me?
see you at the for one thing, I have a mask on, so that's helpful.
So you're seeing me from here.
That's right. But, it's kind of like, well, this is who I am. And I'm more interested in the quality of the moments I spend and less interested in
Yeah.
what you think about how I'm spending my moments, I guess I would put it.
And it's funny too, because like I said, I'm not even middle-aged yet, but what I've noticed in probably just the last handful of years as I get older, my priorities have shifted towards not so much superficial things, but the quality of my friendships, the quality of my relationships, the quality of my conversations even. Um I don't particularly like to waste time anymore on frivolous conversation on that's probably always been my personality, I'll admit that. I I get really bored really easy with surface level stuff, but so
I hear you.
I
Yeah.
seek out I seek out more, um, meaningful conversations, more meaningful friendships, more meaningful relationships, and I feel like, in general, that's part and parcel to aging in and of itself. Kinda like what you said of just, "Okay, I don't care anymore."
Yeah,
I
I think you're
I have the
already
right to live the life the way that I want to because I don't have much longer, you know?
yeah, you're
I mean, I hopefully
already
do,
you're already exhibiting, I
yeah.
think, Brandy, those characteristics which become sort of solidified as we all get older, is that I feel that way too. I mean, just going to a party, not that I've been to one lately, but going to the parties I used to go to, not
Yeah,
that many, but where it's the small talk is almost excruciating.
it's
It's,
exhausting.
yeah,
Yeah,
I'd much rather be home reading a book. I mean, I'd
yeah,
much rather be doing something that is enhancing this time
right.
that I have left rather than, like you said, this frivolous stuff. And it's interesting because there is research about this, that older people actually become, and the term is transcendent.
Mm,
Actually, it's called geotranscendence. And the whole idea is that older people begin to transcend sort of earthly things like materialism,
right.
for instance. They are less concerned about what kind of car do I drive or whatever. I mean, because other things are so much more important, like how am I spending my time and with
Mhm,
whom, and what am I gaining from every day.
right.
So that actually is an innate sort of process that goes on with older people. And see, you're already experiencing some of that. So already your accumulated wisdom is beginning to blossom there, and it will only increase.
I'm gonna be a really awesome old person.
You are going to, oh my gosh, yes. I can't wait. Well, I
I'm gonna
may
think
not
about
be
you.
around, but
I'm gonna think about you when I'm 73 and think about how awesome of a person you are, and I wanna be just like you. So,
oh, thank you.
I wanna care not one bit about what anybody thinks about me and
Yay.
be just happy. But I think that that's an important message, all jokes aside. I think that's a very important message that we think so much about this lack of happiness. We're headed towards this lack of happiness with age. And I think that that's complete BS. And if you think like that, if you think about, I'm just going to be unhappy and lonely and in my old age, I want to be vital and vibrant in my old age. Um, I don't, again, I've not spent a whole lot of time thinking about it, to be quite honest with you. But however it happens, happiness should be the goal, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That is so true. And I think it's appropriate that you're not thinking about it too much
Yeah.
because this is where you are in your life and you have other things that you need to deal with. If you were a Hindu and you're one of your 4 life stages, you're a householder, as I mentioned, and that's your focus is to keep everybody together and keep things moving along. So, yeah, I think, yeah, happiness is so important. And actually, studies show that older people tend to be happier for the most part than younger people. And I think it's because of this perspective they have and this ability to be resilient because they've been through so many ups and downs and they kind of see things for what they are. I mean, you've already experienced some of that. Well, just imagine how you're going to feel when you're much older. There's a real feeling of peace, I think, that often comes over people as they age because they can put those pieces together and they feel
Right.
better about who they are, who they
And I
are. That's
imagine
important.
when letting go of kind of the superficial aspect of youth, because we all have kind of this superficial aspect of youth. We have a youthful appearance, we have a youthful body, we have youthful mannerisms. And I think those, are accentuated and a focus is put on those, especially like we talked about earlier in the marketing and everything that we see on TV. It's kind of revered. But at some point, those things fall away, or at least I hope they do.
Yes, they do.
And I feel like that has to be kind of a weight lifted off your shoulders where you're not worrying so much about, like you said, wearing makeup to the store or how you look or how you fit in your jeans or all these things that are kind of this focus is put on. And when those things are kind of lifted away, it's just you and it's your relationships and it's your personality, your life, your what you exude as you. And I feel like that has to be just kind of this light feeling. And that's kind of where this freeing happiness comes from.
Yeah, it is a sense of freedom. I have to tell you, it really is. And, I have the luxury of kind of being able to do what I want to day to day. I mean, of course, I wrote a book and I'm promoting the book. So, yeah, I mean, I'm
You're
spending time
busy.
doing
Sure.
that. But I enjoy it. I mean, I'm not writing a book about accounting, which, first of all, you would never read a book I wrote about accounting. I wouldn't read it. But the point is, I'm not doing something I don't want to do. And that's part of the luxury of being
Yeah.
older is that we do have, I mean, yes, there are people who still need to work, and I understand all that. They can still infuse some of their days with the things that older people need to be doing, which is reflecting and putting themselves first occasionally instead of everyone else. So, yeah, it is incredibly freeing. I cannot tell you what a difference it makes to not have to feel I have to conform to everybody's idea of who I should be. I can
Right.
be me.
And I
And
think that's an important lesson at any age, really.
it
Um,
is.
I know I struggle with that myself. Um, but so to wrap up here, let's talk about the book. Um, what can we find in the book? Where can we find the book? The whole
Okay,
shebang.
well, the launch date is April 20th.
Okay.
So you can pre-order on Barnes and Noble and through my publisher, Outskirts Press. And you can go to Amazon and they will order the book starting April 20th there. So,
Great.
their outlets, and I'm assuming there are going to be more. My publisher says there will be more, so that will be good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say the big message is, it's been really what we've been talking about, and it's the idea that being old is not only maybe the most important experience you're going to have in your life,
Mm.
because it really is the time when you figure out who you really are and what your purpose perhaps has been here and where you're going from here. But it is a time of great freedom and fun. And I guess I just want to flip that stereotype upside down.
Yeah.
So that aging isn't something we dread, but I kind of would like it to be something we could look forward to. I mean, I know it's hard in this culture, really hard.
You're
This is
basically asking somebody to change their whole way of thinking.
I know it's a real uphill fight, Brandy. I mean, it is, but even if a little bit, I can influence people to see their own old age differently, or at least to try a few of these suggestions I have about not aging gracefully, or letting go of youth envy, and learning to love your aging appearance. And expecting respect from younger people, all of those things. If even a little bit people can do that, well, then I feel I've contributed something. And gosh, that would be my wish, is that we could have a better understanding of what aging is and a better appreciation of older people.
And having more conversations about it, because I've enjoyed this conversation so much.
Oh, me too.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I wish you and I were in the same room and we could just have a cup of coffee.
Oh,
and
that'd be
continue
great.
talking. Yeah, I'd love it.
Well, I can tell you, I mean, you've definitely touched me and given me a lot to think about. Like I said, I don't think about aging all that much, but I feel like there will be a point where I will. And you've given me a different perspective on that. So a lot to think about.
Oh, good. Yes. Well, good. I accomplished something.
You did.
Oh, great. I feel good about that.
You did. So I appreciate this so much. And I will put all the links to your book in my show notes. And I hope it's a huge success and people get just as much out of it as I did.
Well, thank you so much, Brandy. It's been an absolute delight talking with you.
It's a pleasure. So thank you so much, Kathleen.
You're welcome. Thank you.